Hi, Right Writers. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be looking at point of view, and specifically, we're going to look at first person point of view. So stay tuned for first person point of view. First, let's talk about what is involved with first person point of view. And so, what we really need to be looking for are called pronouns. Pronouns help us identify the point of view within the poem. So when we talk about point of view, it is connected to the narrator. Who is telling the story? Who is speaking? So when you think of point of view, I want you to think pronouns and I want you to think narrator. So who is telling us the story? The first important thing to do is to identify the pronouns in a piece of work, and that will help you determine point of view. So when we're thinking of first person, when we're thinking of the singular, we're thinking of pronouns such as I, me, my, mine. We're talking about maybe myself. And when we speak of more than one, but still in first person, we're referring to the plural. So we have we, us, our, and ourselves. So please keep these pronouns in mind because these pronouns will help you determine what point of view the narrator is taking within a poem or a piece of work. And in this particular instance, we're only going to be looking at first person first. So we're going to begin with I Never Hear the Word Escape by Emily Dickinson. And the first thing that I want to do is I actually want to read the poem, then I will come back and find the text evidence to prove the point of view. So let's first do the poetry reading. I Never Hear the Word Escape by Emily Dickinson. I never hear the word escape without a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. I never hear of prisons broad by soldiers battered down, but I tug childish at my bars, only to fail again. I never hear the word escape without a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. I never hear of prisons broad by soldiers battered down, but I tug childish at my bars, only to fail again. All right, so looking specifically, now that we've read the poem, we are going to look specifically at the text evidence to prove lines from the poem to prove first person point of view. So lines from the poem from Emily Dickinson to prove that we are in first person. So the first thing I want to do is to identify the text evidence. So let's break out our handy dandy pen, Right Writers, and now we'll circle where we see I, me, my, mine, myself, we, us, our, or ourselves. So right here, first pronoun that I see, I. Then I continue. This is stanza number 1, and that's the only pronoun that I see in stanza number 1. Then I go to stanza 2, and I see a few examples of text evidence in first person point of view. I see or I spy I spy I again, and I spy my. So when we're looking for text evidence, we are looking for what I like to call I Spy, the game I Spy. So we have examples of first person point of view in Emily Dickin's work poem, I Never Hear the Word Escape, from stanza 1, and then we also have stanza 2. So now let's go ahead and present our text evidence from the poem. We have, I never hear the word. And in this case, we can just stop, I never hear the word. And that could prove our point. If we would like to use the word escape, the quote within a quote. So in this case, we use singular. And that way the reader knows that we are quoting within a quote. So we would leave it at that, but then again, I want to make sure that I open the quotation, but then I need to close the quotation. So you should see 3 what look like hanging here apostrophes there. So quote within a quote. I never hear the word escape. That is one example. Then we have another example. I never hear of prisons broad. Then we see, but I tug childish at my bars. And so we have text evidence examples of first person point of view. Again, we have I, and then I and my. So when we're focused on the text evidence with first person, it's pretty straightforward. It becomes more complicated and more interesting when the narrator shifts perspective. And we will be looking at some examples of poems in other videos where the narrator will shift perspectives. And that's when the poem starts to become a little bit more complex. Again, not necessarily in what they are saying, but more in how they are saying it. And so now in looking at this particular piece, we're just focused on first person point of view. And we have our work, I Never Hear the Word Escape by Emily Dickinson. I'm going to hit Control C. I'm going to hit Control V to again have a copy of the poem. And then I'm going to have the title. And in this case, I never hear the word escape. And we can choose to include the number of the poem here as well, and then written by. So our poet is Emily Dickinson. And notice when I copied the title, I followed it as Emily Dickinson did with I never hear the word, and making sure what's capitalized is capitalized and what's not capitalized is not capitalized. So now we'll take a look at our paragraph here. Let's expand. So in our middle school paragraph, we are going to begin by letting the reader know where we received our work, the title, the poet, and we're going to be focused on first person point of view. You will find that this is pretty straightforward. Now in the second sentence, notice how in the first sentence, I focused on the title of the poem. I focused on that it is a poem. I focused on my topic, first person point of view. And now we'll talk about what first person point of view is. So when we're talking about it, it's basically referring to the first person. So the narrator is in the story. The narrator is talking about themselves. So they are relating the story or relaying the story from their own perspective. Through the pronouns I and my, the work is told from the narrator's perspective. And so now we will prove it using the text evidence. For example, and I'm going to put these two together because they both use the pronoun I, Control C, Control V. For example, I never hear the word escape, and I never hear of prisons broad. Use the pronoun I. Dickinson also uses first person when she states, but I tug childish at my bars. So in this case, here's what we have. In Emily Dickinson's poem, I Never Heard the Word Escape, she uses first person point of view. Through the pronouns I and my, the work is told from the narrator's perspective. For example, I never hear the word escape and I never hear of prisons broad, both use the pronoun I. Dickinson also uses first person when she states, but I tug childish at my bars. Therefore, the poem is told from Dickinson's point of view. And there we have it, a very straightforward paragraph involving the pronoun, first person point of view, the pronouns I, me, my, mine, and myself. Notice how, again, she stayed in the singular, and we could even be more specific in saying, therefore, the poem is told from Dickinson's point of view, using a singular, using the singular. So we could even include that, uses singular first person when she states, therefore, the poem is told from Dickinson's point of view. So going back to the why, I return back to the poem. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. Just looking at the poem itself again. I never hear the word escape without a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. I never hear of prisons broad by soldiers battered down, but I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So in this case, we see the word escape, we hear that I never hear, so it's something that's never done. Without a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. And then we have this idea of escaping in the first stanza. We see words like blood, expectation, and attitude. Then in the second stanza, we see words like prisons broad, soldiers battered down, I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So we definitely wonder to ourselves, I never hear the word escape, and just trying to figure out why talk about it from that perspective, or why use the pronoun I and things that are never heard, never hear of prisons broad, but I tug childish at my bars. Thinking about the text evidence here, we see, again, I never hear the word escape. And then we have without a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. So here, again, when we're thinking about the why do this? So it definitely makes it sound as if there is this, without a quicker blood. So heart is racing. So when the word escape is actually heard, the heart is racing. Again, this use of expectation, a flying attitude. So basically there is, excitement as soon as that word is actually heard, because by using the never here and then the never and then without, so it's really sort of saying, I hear the word escape with a quicker blood, a sudden expectation, a flying attitude. And so in this case, there is this idea of escape being, something exciting. There is a point of, excitement at, all that's possible, excitement at what is possible. Because again, the blood is racing, and so excitement at what is possible. And then we have in the second stanza, and in looking at I never hear of prisons broad by soldiers battered down, what I really like is not so much that line, but I like where it says, but I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So even though we have an example of first person, I never hear of prisons broad by soldiers battered down, I actually want to take that part out and focus on, but I tug at my bars only to fail again. And so in this case, when I use a forward slash, it lets the reader know that this is a separate line. And so I can do that as a writer, is I can use that forward slant there, that bar, to represent that this is a next line in the poem. But I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So there is excitement at what's possible. However, it just cannot be done. And I know that because the word but is used, that conjunction, but, that is definitely implying that something that cannot happen. But I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So excitement at what is possible, and I hate to use another word, a synonym for but, however, it cannot be done. It cannot be possible. Whatever is what's making that excitement, that idea of escaping. However, it cannot be possible. So there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of some of words and ideas that are not necessarily said and shared. And so I'd like to keep those together because I think they work much better in explaining this idea of what is possible is in fact not possible. And so there's this between stanza 1 and stanza 2, and I'm going to make a note here that this is stanza 1 and stanza 2, that there's this idea of, again, something being possible and then it just cannot be done. And that's how we will approach this upper level example, this high school paragraph or more advanced paragraph, using the why, the analyzing the text evidence in more detail for first person perspective or first person point of view. So in this case, I'm going to, again, borrow a lot of what was used in the middle school version, but we are elaborating on the why and adding on only to fail again. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. I'm going to just make this in bold and underline. And as I scroll down here, we're going to take a look. In Emily Dickinson's poem, I Never Heard the Word Escape, she uses first person point of view. Through the pronouns I and my, the work is told from the narrator's perspective. For example, I never hear the word escape in stanza 1. In stanza 1, implies, and so here we're discussing what it might mean. In stanza 1, implies excitement, implies what is possible. Well, I need to put, before I put implies what is possible, I'm going to need to put the next part, without a quicker blood. So I'm going to put that part in, and I'm going to use our /, without a quicker blood. In stanza 1, implies excitement at what is possible. However, the tone shifts. So it's almost as if we go positive and then the tone shifts into a more negative, or a self-conscious, I can't do this, but I tug childish at my bars only to fail again. So implies excitement, implies a positive excitement at what is possible. However, the tone shifts into a more negative perspective when in stanza 2, Dickinson writes, "But I tug childish at my bars only to fail again." Here, the narrator expresses what is not possible. Instead, the narrator feels, again, this idea of, if you're tugging childish at my bars only to fail again. So in this case, instead, the narrator feels this childish. The word childish could mean, when you're a child, there's a sense of helplessness because you are dependent upon adults or upon others to take care of you. So instead, the narrator feels helpless. I'm going to take it from the top. In Emily Dickinson's poem, I Never Heard the Word Escape, she uses first-person point of view. Through the pronouns I and my, the work is told from the narrator's perspective. For example, I never hear the word escape without a quicker blood in stanza 1 implies a positive excitement at what is possible. However, the tone shifts into a more negative perspective when in stanza 2, Dickinson writes, "But I tug childish at my bars only to fail again." Then we've got that exclamation point. Here, the narrator expresses what is not possible. Instead, the narrator feels helpless and this idea of failure. Instead, the narrator feels helpless and unable to escape the prison they are in, or escape the prison they have created. Therefore, first person point of view hints at the conflict or the struggle, at the conflict or the internal conflict faced by the narrator. Therefore, first person point of view hints at the internal, so it's happening within herself, at the internal conflict faced by the narrator. We took the evidence of the first person and leveled it up, brought it to light, and again, making your argument. You may have a different perspective on how you are viewing this poem, and that is okay. Defend it. Please defend your perspective using the text evidence. Ultimately, that is what this is about. Thank you so much, Right Writers, for sticking it out again here with Cruz. I appreciate you, love you all very much. Thank you. I hope this ensures your success in thinking about first person. Keep in mind, there will be more to come.